All right. Welcome to Bonehead. It is my pleasure to have the auteur. I'm terrible with pronouncing things. Alex Proyas, the great director, on our show today. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Now,
thank you. Lovely to be with you.
we were just talking about you being shooting The Crow in Wilmington, but we pride ourselves in trying to find a question that no one has asked you. And we pride ourselves always trying to start off with that question.
Okay.
And as
I challenge you to do that.
I've got it.
Okay.
I've got it. And you will be proud of me. I hope.
Right.
So once again, doing a deep dive, trying to watch other interviews, trying to stay away from the cliche questions. The one question I have is, because we're social media friends and that I follow you, how has giving sugar up changed your life?
Yeah. That is a good question, but I actually have been asked that before.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Alex, I couldn't find that anywhere.
I made a big deal out of, as you clearly know, I made a big deal out of giving up sugar, which was one of my great loves in my life recently.
Look at us.
Yeah. a lot of other bad stuff that goes with passion for sugar, but it's been look. It's honestly been fantastic. It's I highly recommend it. It's the one part of the diet that has not been very good, I have to say, over the years. When you're shooting films, you get very tired and long hours and stressed, and so you eat a lot of high energy food, and a lot of that can, like, I send my guy out to get, or girl, my assistant, to go out and get me a burger or something if we were shooting late at night, or pizzas, all that bad stuff that we love so much, but it was the sodas, the soft drinks that went with that gave me that instant energy boost that I really needed. And it's just, I have to say, I was pretty heavily addicted, as a lot of us are, to sugar in particular,
Yeah.
And so now I've basically gone completely cold turkey on it for the last, it's probably been almost 4 or 5, 6 months, maybe. I've lost track. But I don't crave it anymore. So I don't have sodas. I don't have, I drink a lot of coffee through the day, and I don't have any sugar in that at all. And because it all adds up, just a couple of sodas, or even those fruit juices, pre-prepared fruit juices, they're almost as high in sugar as sodas are.
Yeah.
And, 3 or 4 cups of coffee with a couple of teaspoons in, and you end up with consuming like about that much sugar,
Right. Yeah.
And every day. And that's really, really bad for you. So I've just gotten rid of it all. I have so much more energy anyway, without that stuff. And, I can't say enough good things about it. It's really great. If you can do it, it's a great thing to do.
Well, 2 things. One, I admire you for being able to do it. I gave up regular soda a long time ago, but it hasn't helped me because I actually love chocolate. And the second part is, damn it, I was hoping, I was searching so hard to do something that no one had asked. So sorry about that.
No, that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
But before James, you have another one. I want to try another way. All right.
Okay, go, shoot.
Yeah, and I'm going to phrase it differently, because my wife said the way I did phrase it was too cruel. If you had the world's most delicious cookie on sugar, and you had to take it away from either Will Smith or Tom Rothman, who would you take it away from?
I wouldn't take anything away from Will Smith, because he's much bigger and stronger than I am. He actually lifted me up during an interview. We were doing a media, like a junket type thing, with a room full of journalists. He actually lifted me up, and I've never actually been lifted up.
I haven't either, not in a long time.
By someone since I was a kid. It was a very weird sensation, actually. He was proving how strong he was, and I think he certainly succeeded, because I'm not. I'm a little lighter now because of my no sugar diet, but not much lighter, and I was pretty much a lot heavier in those days. I would definitely not take anything away from Will. Tom Rothman, I'd try and take as much as I possibly can away from, including cookies and all kinds of things. But not that I have that ability. But if I had a magical power, I would do that.
And I know that's a well-worn story, but I wanted to do it in a different way as far as asking that. So at least I got that. So James, are you ready? I know you're ready for your question.
Well, you directed music videos, but I noticed that you were also credited as the writer for the Fleetwood Mac video for Everywhere. And I actually had a
Yeah.
question. What is writing a music video? What does that consist of, and how do
I
you
don't
go about that?
know. I've got no idea. I was the director of that video, but I don't know who would be foolish enough to music. I mean, I guess you do write them, but as a director, you kind of come up with the concept. But I mean, to write a video is sort of kind of a bit far fetched, you know. That actually was based on a very famous poem. In fact, that video. So I can't even take whatever puny writing credit I would normally take for a music video. It's a famous poem by someone who I should know and should remember, but I don't. You know, so we just found that and went, this is a great, you know, story to tell in visually, you know, without any dialogue, and it seemed to be appropriate to the song. So that's how we brought those two things together. That's why it's about, you know, the visuals. I don't know if you've seen the video, but the visuals are very, you know, they're like a you know, period piece, period movie. You know?
Right. So you and I also have something else in common. We're both only children, and there's a few years difference between us because I got a VHS on the, you know, camcorder, and you got a Super 8.
Right.
So I'm curious, when I was you do a great video on your channel, and what's your channel called? On your YouTube channel?
Mystery Clock Cinema is the YouTube channel.
Right. I'm sorry, I was trying to get you to plug it because you have your short films on there. You have combinations of your commercials, your music video work, and you've done a couple of segments on movies that you think other folks should watch, at least buy them on Blu-ray and not just stream them. And I'm curious, and I may have missed it when I was researching, but I'm trying to find those movies that just that clicked in your head when you were a child of I want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's easy to answer, and I have answered that many times. That was a multi-pronged question you were asking. I wasn't quite sure what to jump into.
Oh, that's okay. I want you to go into all of it.
There are a lot of interesting things that raises. But yeah, the film that made me want to make movies is 2001, and I saw it when I was very, very young. It wasn't. I saw it theatrically. My dad used to take me to the movie, you know, and my mum as well. But my dad particularly was a real movie buff, and he would go and see movies that sometimes my mum wasn't that interested in. And this was the re-release. It wasn't because I'm old, but I'm not that old.
No, you're not old.
So it was the film. The film came out once, I think, and then it didn't do well, and then the drug culture discovered it overseas, and then in Australia it got re-released, I think, in the early 70s, which is when I saw it. But I was still very young. I probably was like about 6 years old or 7 years old or something when I saw the film. And it was, you know, I'd definitely seen films before that, but this is a film that really, as a kid, it just completely blew my mind. I had no idea what was going on. I remember asking my dad constantly. It was just me and him that went to see it. And we saw it on it was actually a Cinerama screen that was built for Cinerama in Sydney that's, you know, now long gone. But so it was a huge experience with a 6-track sound, and it was an amazing, and that film, you know. And I remember asking my dad, you know, like constantly, and he was like, shh, just watch it, you know. Because he had no idea what was going on either, of course. He just heard about this thing, you know, this cult experience, you know. And he'd see all the movies basically, and it just, you know, really kind of blew. Yeah, it's all I can describe it as. Blew my mind, you know, as it did with many other people. And you know, it wasn't like I walked out as a, you know, convert to film, but that came a few years later when I was actually old enough to bug my parents to get me a Super 8 camera. It was like, I think I was about 10 when they got me a camera. And that's when I was going, well, I want to be a filmmaker, you know. But looking back, that was the origin of my madness in this ridiculous industry, you know.
So what are some of Joe Dante, the director, once said that you can watch a movie and most directors, or a lot of, especially the good ones, especially people like you who have a vision or voice is what I prefer. You know, you can tell that the voice is coming through, that they're representations of the director. Do you feel that way about you and your films? That
Oh
the
yeah,
representation of who you are?
yeah, totally, totally. It's Hollywood gets in the way of that, unfortunately.
Right.
They don't. There's the the odd thing for me is that they hire you because of your voice, and then
Yes.
they because you of what the special thing is, I assume. Otherwise, why they don't hire someone else, I don't know. And
Hmm.
then they choose to try and silence that, or just water it down at every possible point, which is just, to me, kind of completely. I still don't understand. If you can explain it to me, I appreciate it.
No, I
Um,
can't. I know
but
exactly what you're saying.
yeah, so it is a real strange thing. But to me, it's like the great films and the great filmmakers that I admire, and I think many of us admire, are ones that you can recognize that that eye, or that voice, as you say. And I always equate it to like someone playing a musical instrument.
Hmm.
Like a great musician or a great singer. You can identify that quality that they have, that very individualistic identity that they have very clearly, if you know your stuff.
Yeah.
And they're the sort of films I've always loved, and clearly from 2001, and Kubrick, and they're the films I've always wanted to make. But it's hard, and it's increasingly difficult to make films, the auteur films, for want of a better word, in the commercial sphere. It's really proving very difficult, more and more difficult, particularly in the science fiction and fantasy world, which is generally to this time has been expensive. And I always imagined, like when I started doing this, I always imagined, well, if I get really good at this stuff and I actually make them a few dollars, make the money men a
Hmm.
few dollars, that one day they'll leave me alone and I'll just be able to do my thing. But sadly, that day never ever comes. And even for the great filmmakers these days, even for the very successful filmmakers,
Like
even for them it
Nolan.
doesn't come.
Hmm.
Well, literally, he may be a rare exception, but literally, and we'll see what happens now that he's had a film that hasn't done well for whatever circumstances, because Hollywood doesn't care about the circumstances. All they see is the bottom line.
And he's had a
Um,
tiff
but
over Warner Brothers and streaming. Yeah.
and that too, yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, regardless of naming specifics, the whole one for them, one for the filmmaker attitude, even that clearly doesn't work. That becomes something that, because if the one for them doesn't quite succeed in the way they wanted to, for whatever extenuating circumstances, I'm talking from my own personal
Right.
experience, it makes it very, very difficult to then do one for you. Um, and yet, I was going on the last one. I was going, well, this is definitely one for them, but the them were well, it wasn't even them. It was other thems who became who created this sort of mad, politically incorrect kind of mythology around this film, and it just doomed the movie
You're talking about
commercially.
Gods of Egypt. I'm sorry. Just
I'm
so our
talking about Gods of Egypt.
yeah,
Yeah,
just so for our audience.
yeah, which was kind of murdered, financially speaking, at the box office, because people in your lovely land decided that it was not cast correctly.
Yeah.
And it's a very ironic for an Egyptian guy like me, when I'm being told that I haven't cast my movie in Egypt correctly.
Because you're
I think,
Egyptian and Greek, right?
well, the interesting thing about getting onto this topic is that the current the people who are currently in command of Egypt are the Arabs, as we know.
Hmm.
Now, the Arabs kind of, Egypt has historically been the center of civilization for
Hmm.
millennia, and it's been conquered by many, many people, right? We don't really clearly know who the ancient Egyptians were, other than theory, right? The Greek Egyptians, my people who are no longer there, we got booted out in the 60s when my parents came to Australia.
Right.
We go back to Ptolemy and Alexander and Cleopatra. Cleopatra was a Greek Egyptian. So we actually, really my and I mean, this stuff is ridiculous to even talk about. I've been forced to talk about this stuff because of this specific instance with gods of Egypt.
And I didn't, and thank you for sharing. I actually didn't intend to go this way, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk about this because it's still a source of great frustration. And
I can imagine.
So many people watch the movie now and go, well, it's a really good movie. It's like, yeah, it's fine. It's like, and they just, every opinion was siding with this concept that it was whitewashing and therefore it wasn't a good movie. So basically, my heritage goes way back. My dad always used to say that I was called Alex because I was direct descendant from Alexander the Great, which is complete and utter fabrication, I'm sure. He was convinced that was the case.
Because you probably were to him, right?
To him, yeah. Well, see, Greek Egyptians and Greeks generally, and a lot of European cultures, they go, the male child firstborn is one of two names. It's either the father or the grandfather, and it just alternates forever. Goes right back. So anyway, it's that's neither here nor there. But yeah, that whole incident with the film was just, I went, wow, this is insanity, utter insanity. It seemed like it was the perfect storm, because it was like Trump was being nominated when the film was coming out and looked like he was going to be get in, and there was incredible social media kind of antagonism and division, which I have to say, it's very sad, but your country continues to be suffering from incredible division, and it just seems to be getting worse. And,
oh my goodness!
And I was like, I was just one of the very, very many bits of collateral damage. My movie was, so I can't say that I'm, I'm like a kind of an irrelevant part of it, really, because I think you have a lot bigger issues to deal with.
Oh, we had an insurrection. I mean,
yeah, I know. We all.
It's batshit crazy. Yes, with horror. Yes. Well, imagine if you lived here, or imagine if you were fairly socially liberal in a very red state.
Yeah.
So we're often the blueberries.
I spend most of my day talking to people in America, friends and colleagues, and so I know how bad it all is. And it's my second home. I mean, I've virtually lived in Los Angeles over the years, for longer stretches of time than I have in Sydney, in Australia. So I'm very aware of the culture. Though I must say that 2016, when I mean, we got a sense of it, with just going back to Gods of Egypt again for a moment. We got a sense of this kind of growing division and anger on social media, and that was driven by the entire thing.
Yes.
But I was really kind of overwhelmingly surprised by how strong those divisions had become and how vehement the anger was. That was really surprising at that early point. I'd spent a few years actually in Sydney making the movie, so I'd lost a little bit of connection, I guess, with those emotions that were building in the States. But it was really quite an extraordinary time, and it's continued. I mean, it's really continued on that trajectory. And unfortunately, it's like people. I'm not Democrat or Republican. I'm not. I don't vote there, and I'm not. I have friends on both sides in the film industry, and the Republicans obviously don't. A lot of them don't want to admit that they're Republicans because the film industry is strongly Democrat,
Right.
But from my point of view as an Australian living in Australia, I don't side with either side. All I see is the incredible division that both sides are actually responsible for, and continuing to expand that rift, and I feel very, very sad for that, because we hope Biden is going to bring everyone together. That's, I guess, the hope, rather than continuing to drive that wedge. But I do hope that's what happens. But I know that intrinsically that's not a politician's kind of quest. Politicians' quest is to continue to drive the wedge, and they're like that all over the world. Trump did it in a far more kind of in-your-face style.
Yeah.
But here we have, Labor and Liberal, who are the, Democrat and Republican here. The two-party system functions similarly here, and it's the same crap. It doesn't matter who's in office. They're trying to continue to drive the wedge, continue to distance the other side, and continue to gain their own points in that fashion, and make every part of life political. That's their goal, unfortunately. So I'm down on all the politicians everywhere in the world, quite frankly.
Well, the thing is I don't think it can be fixed. The genie's out of the bottle, whatever cliche you want to say. And there's hate on both sides. You're absolutely correct. I'm registered independent, but there's hate on both sides. And what I can't fathom is that, and this is from my liberal friends, and I'm of course liberal, but who will refuse and who stop talking to their Republican friends because they voted for Trump. And my point, and I've gotten several people mad at me who stopped talking to me when I said, there's some people in Europe who had to live with Nazis a couple of years after the war. And if they can do that, I can live with someone who voted for Trump. Does that make sense to you? I mean, there are some things. It's not like Nuremberg. It's not like Nuremberg took care of everyone who did war crimes.
It doesn't achieve anything, and
no, we all have to work together.
Even to put it into that context, I mean, yeah, look, Trump was a bad guy and did a lot of bad stuff, and mostly did stuff that continued to drive people further apart. I think that's the most unforgivable part of his administration. But there's certainly no comparison to the rhetoric of comparing it to Nazis and fascists and whatever the hell everyone was comparing everyone else, the other side, to, is just kind of it's just insane. It's just part of this social media madness that's gripped everyone. It's possessed us. I think social media is the greatest evil. The world has been perpetrated upon the world in the last 10 years. I think the iPhone and the putting all that stuff into your palm of your hand and instantly, so yeah, well, I mean, we're all doing it. We're on social media now, for God's sake, or we will be.
And that's what I was about to say.
And those things, I mean, that part of it is great. That's terrific. There's obviously there's a good side to splitting the atom as well. But there's a really bad side to this stuff as well, and social media. See, particularly having I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and just the fear I have about how that technology is going to be used in this next generation and used against us. I'm really kind of concerned about it, as I know we all are.
Because it's eroded borders, I think, and that can be a positive thing. But I think about the cases now. I have a daughter as well, and it used to be, using an extreme example, something you could pick up and move, and it didn't follow you. But now people tag you on social media, and it's almost a fingerprint that follows you everywhere. So yeah, it's I agree. It's a tool that could be used for seemingly infinite good, but it can also be used to do a lot of, it seems almost inescapable. And if you don't have it, people think you're odd too. So
The positives are
that's
that, you know, we do a little part for a friend of ours, Glenn, who has a show in Australia, and we are friends, and we've been friends for over a year, and we've never met in person, and we talk all the
yeah.
time. That's the great part, and we're able to do this, and we're all together. The bad part is I don't think people are allowed to make mistakes anymore because it will follow you for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
A
there's that, and
misspoken
there's the
word.
cancel
That's the
culture
the cancel
approach,
culture
and
of people saying
this
things,
stuff
and yeah,
is horrible. Yeah,
yeah,
there's nothing good that will come from that. They're witch
it's
hunts, you
bullying.
know.
Hmm.
Yeah, and you know, it's like so many things. You know, the small number of bad people taint the whole thing. You know,
Yep.
and they taint it for everybody. And that's the case with, you know, yes, there are some bad people, and there are some bad people who don't deserve to be tweeting on, you know, endlessly, etc., etc. But as soon as you adopt that, as soon as you cross that line, you are in really, really dangerous waters, you know. And people just are not seeing that, you know. They're not seeing that we are heading very specifically into 1984. I mean, I think we're already there, quite frankly, and we have to do everything we can to fight this stuff. You know, those who should not be suppressed and frightened into not expressing that opinion. That is the stuff of George Orwell. That is
Hmm.
just completely unacceptable in a democratic, you know, country or a democratic world, you know. And we just have to do our darndest to try not to let that happen, you know.
Yeah. Well, this was fascinating. We got totally off of where I thought we were going on this. So back to your personality. How did music? So I was trying to figure out, because I was watching your commercials, and of course you have such an eye, such a vision, such a voice. And I was trying to figure out, how do you get that through the process of making a commercial? And did that help you with fighting or getting that voice through the studio system?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I kind of, you know, my visual style or whatever, the way I tell
Hmm.
stories visually and structure things, and
Yeah.
it's all part of trying to focus in on what it is that is me, you know,
Hmm.
trying to understand that and trying to express that. And at the same time, it's also completely kind of you know, unconscious,
Yes.
non-conscious, you know, I'm not already aware of it. I just do it. I mean, I'm always staggered to I don't often go back and look at my old films or anything that I've done before.
Hmm.
And I occasionally get a reason to do that if there's like a reissue of a film, or, you know, director's cut or whatever. And I'm always staggered by how little I've evolved, how little I've changed, and how I just keep doing the same crap over and over again, you know.
Well, there's a really
But
quick.
yeah, what's
Yeah,
that?
no, really quick. I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's an Adidas commercial, and I was watching it, and I was thinking, this is so much Dark City.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that one was consciously Dark City because that was only a couple of years before Dark City,
Okay. Yeah.
and so yeah, that's shot before we did Dark
Hmm.
City, and I had Dark City as a script, and I was trying to get it financed, and so I actually made the commercial look very similar to Dark City, because I used that as a kind of a leverage to show studios and say, oh, it's going to look something like
Okay.
this, you
Well,
know.
great, because I was
Um,
watching it thinking, oh my God, it's Dark City. But now
Yeah,
that makes
but
sense.
even more so, I mean, stuff for me that that I go, I'm just doing it. They're obsessions, you know. I have obsessions, and I guess people, you know, I mean, in films you're supposed to write characters that change
Hmm.
and evolve, but the fact is, I don't think people really change that much, you know. I think people show a different face to the world, and you know, if you know, they go, oh, he became an asshole when he became successful and famous. But it's like, no, he probably always
Already was
was
an
an asshole,
asshole.
you know. And he just allowed, you know, he was not scared to show that side of himself when he became successful, you know. So my point, I guess, is as an artist, as a filmmaker, I haven't really, I get to play on on different levels with different resources and different budgets and actors and whatever. But I'm always going back to my personal obsessions, and those don't really change that much, you know. They're obviously very strongly impacted. People's personality and attitudes are very strongly impacted at the very beginning, you know, early on in life. But I think as a filmmaker, I just kind of explore the same obsessions, trying to understand, trying to solve, you know, problems, trying to understand myself, trying to understand the world. And, you know, the more you learn, the less you know, kind of thing. That's kind of the one great thing that I've learned, I guess, over time is don't be scared of re-exploring things. Don't be worried about telling the same kind of story all the time, because eventually you'll find the perfect way to tell it. And you know, and I you know, as a filmmaker, you always hide stuff, you know, under dressing, your art department and whatever. And but the themes are always the same, you know. They're always, and I've just become more conscious of that over the years, you know.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, because you wrote Dark City and but you directed The Crow, and I wanted to ask about how do you approach the difference between directing something, graphic novels, and obviously, so as you approach directing, does adapting somebody else's work, do you look at how they approached it, or do you think about how it has to look on film?
No, you as finding other work that you direct, you know, and I've got to say, not wishing to take anything away from David Scow, who wrote, you know, did the lion's share of writing on The Crow, or any of the other writers that I've worked with. I mean, I write on everything. I don't. Sometimes I just don't get credits. You know, there's the WGA gives you you know, you have to have written I think over a certain percentage.
40%.
40%.
40%. Right? Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah, and then it's really when you're working with different teams of writers on different stages of the development, it's really hard to quantify that. You know, they go through an arbitration, as you know, but it's sometimes really hard to quantify that. And all the different teams are fighting like tooth and nail to not get other credits, because that distills whatever proceeds they get from the profits of the film, etc. And so that's, you know, you're put into an antagonistic situation, you know. So with Dark City, I actually said to my two writers, I mean, I should have had probably sole credit for Dark City, but this was in early days of working, and I was just being completely fair. And I went, well, Lem Dobbs has done this and David Gory has done that.
Yep.
And so therefore we should just go to the WGA and say, we all agree that we should get shared credit, you know? And so they didn't go through arbitration and stuff like that. It was the only occasion where that's ever happened, you know, and I didn't have the attitude in those days of I must fight tooth and nail to get credit, you know. I don't, and I still don't really. I don't care about that stuff unless it's unfair, and it has been on some projects. Knowing, for example, I mean, I put so much writing into that, and even more so, my co-writer Stuart Hazeldine on that project should have had credit. You know, I could sort of see why I may not have received it, but Stuart should definitely have had credit. And he got kind of gazumped by the whole arbitration process, because we were writing as a team, me and Stuart, for a period of time. I was writing on my own for a period of time. He was writing on his own. So really, it should have all been parceled in together, and you know, I mean, it was a page one rewrite on that project. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, I'm always involved with the writing, but at the very origin of something that comes to me, it's incredibly rare that I go, wow, great, this is perfect, I can go start shooting it tomorrow, you know. And that's only maybe happened a couple of times in all the thousands of scripts that I've been offered and read over the years, you know.
Yeah.
Usually if I end up with a script that I go, you know what, there's some really interesting idea in here, we can make something of that. And then we usually develop it with either I write or someone else writes, or the original writers come in and keep writing or whatever, and that goes on for a period of time until we get to the final script. But that core idea, that core thing, and the core dynamic between the characters is what gets me involved. And that always, and how do I pick that? Well, I pick that from themes and ideas that I'm obsessed with. So they all fit into my wheelhouse conceptually, So Knowing is a great example of that. The Crow is also a great example of that. I'm obsessed with, life after death and other realities and what happens when we die, and et cetera, et cetera. And so all these things, there's without exception. So something like Knowing came along that sort of asked something really pertinent questions, intriguing questions to me, and so they seem to fit my. And it's organic. It's not. I don't intellectualize this stuff because sometimes you're still trying to sort out exactly what the themes are. But it hits me on a gut level, and I go, well, this is a story that I can get passionate about telling, because that's the most important thing, I think, to find that if you don't have a passion to tell a story, it's really hard to sustain an entire movie making experience. It's tough, it never gets easy, as we've established, and so you have to have the sustenance of that incredible burning desire to get the story told, and so that's got to be part of your DNA to be able to do that.
I love Knowing. I love the ending of Knowing, and but I'm curious, both that and Dark City, especially Dark City, how did you get away with both those endings for a studio?
Well, actually, the ending of Knowing is what made me. That was in the script that came to me, and that was what got me to make the movie.
I loved it. I saw it in the theater, and I just adored it.
Yeah, and when in the script that I read, the spec script that I read, it came to me via Summit, I think, from memory, and I was reading a script and going, it's interesting, but there's a lot of issues that need to be sorted out, etc. And then this whole concept of the world ending came up, and I'm like, this is just not going to happen. They're going to cop out. The script is just not at the level conceptually where I as a reader, I'm going, everyone's going to die, and when it actually did happen, I'm like, okay, I'm sold. And so I went to the studio and I said, I will make this film only if this ending never changes, only if we can actually do exactly this in the finished film. And they said, okay, we agree to that. I think it was even in contract, form. I insisted on putting it in a clause in the form, because I knew that at some point, somewhere along the line, a test screening or whatever, someone would go, no, we don't like it. It makes us feel bad. So therefore you must change the ending. And sure enough, that did happen in some test screenings, but I knew that it would not be touched, so.
Those test screenings, man, you drag, a bunch of people at the mall into a movie in the middle of the day or night or something who are there I never understand the logic. I get the logic of sitting there with an audience maybe and getting the feel as the movie plays as a filmmaker, going, well, maybe this joke doesn't land or this scare doesn't land, but just filling out the cards and doing test things later and everybody dissecting it and they all think they're Kubrick.
No.
Right? No. It makes no
Particularly
sense.
in LA, they're all the same, they're all kids who are trying to impress the studio people, so they can get a movie, they get to direct a movie, so they're trying to pick any holes they can in it, so yeah, it's a crazy scenario. It's one of the things that's destroying, it's killing films, I think, one of those things, because as a filmmaker, of course you want to know whether something plays, but we have friends and colleagues that we can test the film with and see if something works, who will give us a much more honest opinion rather than trying to win any points,
Right.
So it's it's a pretty nonsensical process, I've got to say.
That's okay. So Rob Zombie has said before that one of the people he's never gotten to work with and who he's never been able to get is Richard O'Brien. Right. So was it tough to get Richard O'Brien into Dark City? He's fabulous. He's fantastic.
Yeah. No, I don't think it was particularly hard. I mean, it was, I love Richard. He's a great guy. He's a very complex character.
Okay.
And he's been kind of brutalized by the system as well. We had a lot to share. Well, at that stage, I hadn't been quite as brutalized as he'd been, but the whole financial aspects of Rocky Horror and how he was kind of, cut out of that whole loop when the film became, and he invented Rocky Horror, right? It's his thing,
Yes.
He actually did. He was writing a musical version of Dark City while we were shooting. He'd be writing songs off to the side. And
I would love to see a musical version of Dark City.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see like every year that goes by, I go, I must call Richard and we must create the stage show version. And he's the only I know who made a rhyme, and I'm killing myself because I don't remember what the rhyme was.
That's
okay. It was a particularly clever one. He made a rhyme with necrophilia. He managed to find a word that rhymed with necrophilia, and it's in the context of a song, So I give him huge points for being able to rhyme that with that word. But no, he was, he loved the idea of it. I remember going to him, and it was one of the very few occasions where I wrote the part for Richard.
Okay. Yeah.
As I was writing the character, I started writing the film. I was in London, and Richard was actually on a. He had this kid show that he was doing, and I remember sitting in a hotel room in London. I think I was working on some commercial music video or something, and he came on the TV, and I went, "Oh, it's Richard O'Brien," and he plays a character in like a more nefarious character. Than he did in Rocky Horror, which is the only other thing I've ever seen him in.
Yeah.
And he was really great in this role for this kid show, And so I started thinking of his voice. Every time Mr. Hand spoke, I was imagining Richard saying the lines, and with that incredible alien kind of smooth voice that he has, And so I would have been well stumped if he'd said no, but he was. I think I probably told him the story that I wrote it for him, and maybe that helped. I don't know. Maybe that helped get him. But yeah, he came on board pretty quickly, and and he's from New Zealand, of course, so he knows and likes this part of the world. So I said we're going to go to Australia, and he was fine with that. And then when we were casting everything else. All the other roles of the strangers in Dark City, there were so many times where I would use Richard I was trying to explain how I wanted them to be.
Yeah.
And I just found it easier to go, just be like him, So like Ian Richardson, who's a very, sadly he's passed away, a very accomplished actor who played the Uber stranger. He was like, how do you want me to do it, dear boy? It's like, we all these questions about, and I'm go, well, then just tell me. And I go, well, kind of like Richard, and he was like, I'm cool with that. I'll do it that way, So everyone was channeling Richard O'Brien on the set at some point,
That's hilarious. Go ahead, Jack.
I have to ask a question about Strange Nostalgia, because I watched it, and I'll be honest, it pulled me in almost immediately, and I kept going, can this keep going? And you made this completely during the pandemic, is that correct?
Yeah.
Was it something you had written before, or was it a product of the pandemic itself?
No, it was. I've been making these short films, and I do them. There's another one on Mystery Clock called Phobos. And I do, they're experiments, and they're short films, but I have none of the concerns of narrative storytelling. I mean, who cares? I think it's hilarious how you put it on YouTube, and whatever you put on YouTube YouTube, someone gives it a thumbs down, like, yeah, we didn't like that. You know, I'm like, it's free. You don't have to watch it. Okay. You can just click that button and go somewhere else. Why spend the energy to just give something a thumbs down? It seems
you're talking to
ridiculous me.
podcasters. You
Yeah.
know,
I was going to say,
you're talking to middle-aged fat white men who are talking about media. We know a little bit about being hated or thumbs down.
Well, and I was going to say,
it's hilarious to me.
It is free.
We've done this show for a while now, and I think the first time we got a thumbs down was one of the episodes that I looked most forward to doing. We did a retrospective about Vincent Price, who, as a kid, he was my favorite everything. And it was the first thing. The first review we got was, "This is terrible." What?
Yeah, it was earlier on. I mean, you're going to be like episode, I think 171, and it was back in the 20s, and it was, why are you shitting on this?
Like, make fun.
And then we told James he sucked for the next 6 months.
I just love the fact that energy is expended on something that's completely pointless. You know, I always find that a hilarious kind of approach.
We didn't change anything after somebody gave us a thumbs down. We didn't go, oh, well, let's break this down and see what we need
I just do on YouTube. I just do more of it. I just try and get more thumbs. With the short films, it's because the fact is, for the AI or whatever the hell, the algorithm that works out our lives, rules our lives on YouTube, it doesn't care whether it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down, as long as it's a response, you know. So that means nothing to anybody, you know, even less nothing, you know. Yep. So with the short films, I will just do stuff just because I'm trying something. They're experimental. You know, Strange Nostalgia has been incredibly successful in the experimental short film festivals around the world. You know, it's the most awarded film I've ever made by far, you know, and I'm like, this is just insane. This is something that I shot some footage of this beautiful girl, not knowing really what it was going to be used for. And that was the only component that was done before the pandemic, before the lockdown. And I just kind of parked it. And then I was looking for things to do when we just shot this film called Mask of the Evil Apparition, which is a more legitimate narrative film. And then we got locked down. This was early last year. We got locked down, and everyone that I was working with, we all had to go home. You know, so I was sitting there in my brand new studio on my own without any of my resources, going, well, what am I going to do? So I start editing Mask of the Evil Apparition. I get it done. It's finished, you know, the edit at least, you know. And then I'm going, well, what do I do for the next, you know, who knows how long this is going to go on for? So I found this footage. I started putting it together. I found some other bits and pieces that I'd shot on beaches and stuff over the years, and just all sorts of these weird little elements. And I started sticking this thing together in a completely abstract kind of free association way, and started going, can I construct some sort of some kind of not so much a narrative, but a emotive spine to this. Something that holds you. Can I sustain viewership or an audience with something that actually has no narrative and is so limited in its resources? So then I wrote the script based on something I constructed visually. I started seeing ideas and themes in there, and the whole thing about the ocean, the obsession with the ocean. I don't know where the hell that came from. And I contacted an actress that I'd worked with on some films, Maya, who she was locked down at home, and she happened to have, her partner happens to have a little sounds recording studio because he's a musician in their house. So I said, can you record some narrative voice for me? And she said, yeah, absolutely, you know. And I'd be directing her over the phone, and she's doing it, and she would send me files of her voice work, and I'd redo them, and I'd say, no, mic it more closely next time and be more intimate with it. And my composer is someone who I've not yet met, actually still to this day, who contacted me, and he's a very established composer here in Australia. He contacted me and said, anything you want me to do? And I said, well, I've got this, you know, and he ended up doing the Mask of the Evil Apparition as well. And I've not ever met him. We've only talked. He's in another state, and he's not been able to come to our state. So the whole thing was done via remote collaboration, and it was great fun. It was great fun to do. And certainly helped me not go insane, being, not being able to collaborate with, because we all realized at that point in time how much, physical collaboration, like being in someone's presence, is so important to our work. Being I've taken it for granted, I guess, over the years, as we all have. But when you don't have it, it's just such a lonely experience. Even writing, when the loneliest part of the filmmaking process, you're sitting in a room writing, but I'm still getting out and meeting people and physically interacting, and not having that seemed really kind of strange.
So that reminds me of back to Phobos. I was watching it, and you were talking about music, and clearly you've known so many great musicians. You've directed their videos, but there was a part of it that I was thinking when I was listening to the synth score that was very Carpenter-esque. Was that intentional?
Yeah.
Did you request
that track
that?
is no, it's not intentional, but that track is very much. I do agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it, and I hit that note, and I was like, oh man, did John write that? Who's also from Kentucky.
But I drive it much loud. I go much louder. I'm like Carpenter on 11. I'd always drive.
Yeah, I loved it.
They always tell me that my music is too loud, because I love music, and that's the one note I always get from studios with music, because I love playing it loud. I'm the sort of guy who will go into when they're recording when they're recording with an orchestra.
Yeah.
I will go in and sit in amongst the orchestra, because I love the feeling of being surrounded by this incredible score. I did that on Gods of Egypt. Marco Beltrami, who's my frequent composer, collaborator. I think he's done 3 movies for me now. Recorded with a 100-piece orchestra, and it was just great being in there, hearing it. So I'm trying to reproduce that in the theatre at the end, and it's sometimes hard to do that. But I think music is a really, and I think that's also come from Kubrick as well. Yep. Kubrick at a very early point taught me how music can just drive the stories so well, through 2001, but also most of his movies. Clockwork Orange was one where really the music just became like its own character. And
Full Metal Jacket as well, with the pop music.
Yeah, I mean that's that was his approach with everything, and I guess I always have that in my mind, but more so than John Carpenter. But I was aware of the similarities of that track, So
no, I just enjoyed it. Go ahead, James.
Well, I know we don't have too much time left, but I did want to ask a question, because I think Dark City has definitely artwork in it and things like that. But with Phobos, it also has you have some scenes of some classic Greek art, some classic representations of Greek mythology, and the different artwork that pops up throughout that. How did you go about deciding what was going to make it? Or did you go in saying, I want this piece, because you have that classic sense of almost horror art, that are classical pieces that are in there?
Well, Phobos is Phobos means fear in Greek, and it's also one of the Martian moons. Fear and dread, the 2 Martian moons, Deimos and Phobos. So that piece was about fear. It was about, I didn't have a script for that. I just went out for a few hours with the one actor who's in there, and I had one other helper to help me carry gear, and that was it. That was the entire cast and crew for the film. And we went out and shot it in a few hours. And I said to Bonnie, who's the actor, I said, look, I don't know what we're going to do, but I know it's going to be about fear. It says, we'll make it up as we go along. She was like, yeah, I'm cool with that. So we went out, and I just kept inventing scenarios for, there's a girl who loses her car in a car park, but there's something more going on, then someone's following her. And so just very abstract concepts, of course. And so those images that we use are just, again, trying to find images that, and I guess I'm being a fan of the dark side of art, and I'm aware of a lot of great paintings and images from the past that would suggest fear, and express fear. And so that's really the parameters of the stuff that I put in there. I've collected a lot of those images too, just off the internet for other seminars and things that I've done that I do here in Australia. I do a lot of workshops and seminars, and I usually have something because I feel like people would rather watch something interesting behind me and therefore not look at me so much, you know. So I always project like images that always takes people's attention away from my visage, and and that way I can drink water and choke and stuff and do all this stuff that I do when I'm doing a live presentation, and they don't notice that stuff so much, you know. So that were the parameters of the images that I chose, and you know, I think there's also like, you know, historical images like World Trade Center and stuff like that, you know, that are just like instant. Wow, you know, you flash up some frames of that, and you instantly put people your audience into an uncomfortable space, you know.
Yeah.
And so that was the theory anyway. You know?
Well, we promised you an hour, and I'm going to wrap it up with a really cliched question, and it's at least I told you it was going to be cliche.
No, go for it. I want to hear what a cliche question
Well,
is.
actually, I didn't write it down. It came to me while we were going, and you know, I'm always curious about great filmmakers like yourself, and not necessarily the project that got away, but the project that you'd still want to do. And what I'm curious is there, especially since you're such a fan of fantasy and science fiction like we are, is there that one book out there that hasn't been adapted that you'd love to do, or that one story? Preferably.
There's many stories. I'm a science fiction geek from way back, and I used to read a lot of science fiction as a kid and imagine the movie, right? So there's so many of those unmade movies in my brain, you know, and that's what I loved about the science fiction genre literature, is that as a filmmaker, I could actually do that. I could create these films in my mind, you know. There's so many of them. I mean, it's like there's so few that have been touched. Stars My Destination is one, Alfred Best novel that I've tried to get made over the years several times, and it's never come together. But there's also, for me, one of the big major disappointments of my career has been I was very close to making a movie based on Paradise Lost, Milton's Paradise Lost, which is another great piece that I've always been very, very fond of. And the movie was going to be phenomenal. It was going to be extraordinary. It was like I remember going into the studio where I was working, into my office, and sitting down with all the illustrations around me and going, I can't believe they're letting me make this movie, you know. And sure enough, that came true. They didn't let me make the movie. We got very close, but we were shut down because they said it was budgetary, but I still to this day believe they just got scared of the concept, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many of them, you know. And some of them at the moment I'm kind of trying to, you know, every few years I get to explore some of those things, and I'm going back to some of them at the moment, which I would rather not mention. But
no, it's funny that you brought up Stars of Destination, because back to Carpenter in a interview, he said that's the one that he would still love to do.
Really? Oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
And that interview led me to discover Alfred Beaster and read the rest of his books. And
The Demolished Man is also very good.
Demolished Man is a great book. What's the one, 3000? I can't remember. Yeah, so I and then I bought it for the other two Boneheads. I bought them their own copies, and I said, if we ever get a chance, this is the book we should do.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, we could talk about that for an hour.
I mean, there's a lot of writers from that era that's kind of considered the golden age of science fiction, and they're all the stuff. That's all the stuff that I grew up on, and like, you know, rather than specific novels, because there's so many of them, but there are writers like Arthur Clarke, Ray Bradbury, Robert Silverberg. You know, there's so many of them. Asimov, of course. Yep. That they have numerous great, just so much, there's such a wealth of stuff there, and I occasionally hear. I mean, I know they did like Childhood's End recently for TV, and just not just it's I don't know how you mess that stuff up. And I don't like to say anything bad about any fellow filmmaker or any other people's work, because I know how hard it is to make films of any quality, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I get really disheartened by what I'm seeing from a lot of these when someone does stumble upon the opportunity to make one of these great things I hold in very high regard, and they fuck it up. I'm like really I'm kind of pissed off, you know. So,
well, can you say which one lately, maybe in the last few years, that you're like, oh, that is a fuck up?
No, because
No,
that
yeah,
it
okay.
gets into that. Yeah, I'd rather just
I
not
understand.
say. But there's one about to come out that I can say I'm really dreading, which
Does it
again, I
come out?
won't name names.
Does it come out this fall, and it's filmmakers arguing with the WB about streaming and cinema?
I don't know. Could be.
Well, give me credit for at least guessing fairly correctly. Just an answer. Well, you know, Alex, I'm with James. I'm glad that we got that. It's not where I intended to go, but it's fantastic, and I love the aside we did with the 20 minutes and with Gods of Egypt. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thank you so much for sharing your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. Lovely talking to both of you. It's great fun.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
Well, this has been Bonehead Weekly.